Tommy, then Haradia, so I can have a sure. Taven Garamari, Kanangava, Umia Bubian looked at the Kanangava. Umia Bubian looked at the Kanangava. Taven Idama, Mimi Sway, Tati, Mababu. Mimi Sway, Tati, Mabare, Kanangava, Badia Kojame. Tenkara dia, oh, Gudiana, Virigala, Nijare.
Insight Myanmar podcast stands with the Burmese people resisting the tyrannical military rule. For those now listening to this in country, please know that you're not alone. Our platform and the thousands of listeners choosing to hear these stories keeps you in our hearts. Far more people than you may know are sending you metta and including you in their prayers. Your courage and sacrifice are not going unnoticed. You are an inspiration to the world. Thank you for allowing us to play some small role in your revolution. May you be safe and may you be free.
Tabe Lundo, Tenkara, Menukana, Navaru, the Suro, the Mokai.
I'm so pleased to be joined by Ma Thida, who is the author of Prisoner of Conscience, My Steps Through Insane. We met several years ago in the Chinatown apartment of Ma Thida when we were introduced, and were so fortunate to meet again a few months ago in New York, where we were able to set up this podcast interview. And I am just so thrilled to be able to talk about your life and experience, and as well as the intersection between meditation and social engagement that you lay out in your book. So, Ma Thida, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to re-meet you again.
Yeah. So I want to go into what your book lays out, and really picking up from the years 1988 on. Before we get into the events you describe in your book, can you give a little bit of background information and description leading up to 1988, what was happening in your life and your background, as well as what was happening in Myanmar at that time prior to the more significant events that started in 88?
Well, you see, I was born in 1966, and the so-called socialist government, indeed, it was a military government. They started in 1962 already. So throughout my life, it was still under somehow military government, even though it's called themselves the socialist government. And I was brought up in former capital city, Yangon. And my parents are non-Burma, but they are also from pretty far area, even though we settled in Yangon. But I was so lucky to have my grandparents from my mother's side. So since I was young, and I pretty much aware of what's going on through I spent time together with my grandfather and my father. They were listening to the BBC World Service and BBC Burmese service. So I pretty much, knowing the hearing knowledge. And I also was lucky enough to go to other part of the country apart from Yangon. So I were with my grandparents in Malming, in Mon State, and I were in Shan State, Sibo. Most of my cousins lived there. So I think I witnessing the differences of the privileges and the other things by my own eyes. So that also make me pretty much aware the individuals. So I also was a bookworm, and I read a lot, and then I also try to write something. So then I became a short story writer in early 80s, just before the 1988. So I think a lot of the autobiographies by independence fighter and some other well-known philanthropists making me pretty much interested in this kind of the resistance and philanthropy work. So in 1988, I was pretty much a lot about what's going on. And then, I took part in the demonstration, and that's the beginning.
Yeah, thank you for that. And now you're bringing us up to date with 1988. And from 88 on, which is a very significant set of years for anyone knowing about Myanmar history, you describe in more detail in your book what was happening in those years and your relation to that movement. For those listeners who might not know the events leading up to 1988 and what was happening in Myanmar at the time, can you give a brief overview of those events and then the place that you had in them?
In 1988, as soon as we noticed about what's going on, it was pretty heartbreaking. In March 1988, and at that time I was in my final year medical school, and I noticing about the bloodshed crackdown in Rangoon Institute of Technology, and it was pretty alarming. And then we were at the time, all the medical students were pretty much shocked to see how comes a government can kill students easily. And then we took part in the demonstration, but even these demonstrators has been killed again by the military government, the socialist government, especially the incidents in Rangoon General Hospital. They just randomly shoot to the hospital, and some patients and some medical personnel were hit by the shooting, something like that. That make us pretty much alarming. And then at that time, I was also very close to my literature friends, the other friends from the literature wall. So I in touch with them, and I worked together with them throughout these, not just the street protests. I also took part in making the regional, not regional, it's a local newsletters, kind of the alternate day news journal. And that was pretty much all we can do. We just against the what the socialist government had done, and then we just want to spread the news. So it was like very normal for our young students, to do this kind of protest.
Right. You were part of the youth movement at the time. And you found yourself in the middle of this societal upheaval that was going on, that has gone down in the history books and what took place in those years. And you were in the middle of those events and the people and the incidences and the places. And one of the things that happened around you and that you were involved in was the founding of the National League for Democracy, the NLD, and Aung San Suu Kyi rising for the first time as a voice in her own right and in the political movement that she was leading. And I think one of the things that's interesting about your book is that you were a fly on the wall. You were actually more than that. You were also a young participant as these things were being formed, and as some of these parties and the people were finding their voice were being formed. And so I think it's interesting to go back and listen to your words at the time describing the feeling of being in the middle of these events that are taking places around you. And so I wonder if you can read an excerpt from your book in which you describe the NLD offices being set up for the first time.
Our newly established committee office had no furniture and no money to buy any. So we had to ask for donations from friends and well-wishers. We put up the NLD headquarters signboard on September 27 at 56 University Avenue on the day for its registration. Initially, we were only selling membership application forms, but with U N Din's advice, we issue membership cards with numbered codes according to the township of the member. I also had to take care of keeping a record of the members. Although I was good at math and could calculate large sums in my head, I was not very happy with the task at hand since it was not what I wanted to do. We all missed a lot of meals as the people came in droves to buy the forms, and we could not spare any time because no one wanted to wait even a few minutes for us to eat, since they had lived under the Burmese Socialist Program Party for too long, 26 years, and wanted out. Once the applications came back, we had to issue the cards. U N Din arranged for us to assign membership numbers according to the township and its population. By the number, it could be instantly known which township a member came from. Accordingly, I came up with the codes for every card.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, it's a wonderful description describing the very beginning and start of what was to become a greater movement. What are your thoughts and feelings as you read those words again and reminisce on that time?
Well, it was really very good experience working together with U N Din, At that time, how much he had been very, very carefully make these codes. He used the population census book. He having thinking a lot. He also make pretty detail about expectation of how much the number of the membership going to be part of NLD, something like that. This is very good experience to me, even though I'm not that much interested in these things, but now I learned he having very very visionary, and also it is not like get together making the party easily. It is not like that, it's very well planned, and it was under pretty much pressure, even though, we having trying our best and very systematically, I might say.
Right. As you hear other people describe the founding of the NLD and those early days, and you were actually involved in that experience, is there something in being involved and being in the middle of it that you feel that when you read other histories or other people trying to characterize it, you feel that they're missing or they're leaving out based on your lived experience and memory?
at that time, that's why I wrote down my diary, the campaign diary. I joined a couple of trips together with Aung San Suu Kyi to some other part of the country as a campaign trips. And since then, I already noticed I having gone through one of the significant part of the history together with this team, and it should be recorded. Eyewitness account it's cannot be easily done if I forgot. So that's why I try to write down these things when I was passing through. So I having meeting so many people and I having tried to do, but at that time I feel I was pretty dutiful in that sense. I can make this eyewitness account during the 1988-89, but beyond that it was harder to write down.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you do in your book is not just talk about what's happening in your life and also in the greater movement in Myanmar, but you put into context what was happening in the world at that time. And indeed, historians, contemporary historians have looked back on that period in Myanmar, and they've looked at those years of 88 to 90 in a context of some of the greater societal shifts that were taking place in other countries in the world at the time, and the belief that maybe that would also carry over to Myanmar. So can you remind listeners, as you were living through that period, what was happening simultaneously in other societies that might have been impacting or at least motivating the way that you were proceeding within Myanmar at the time as well?
Well, at that time, I think our 1988 movement was very early at that time, even though we were so isolated. That's why anything related to this very big movement were not covered very well by the international media. The Tiananmen Square incidents was a little bit later than us. And then, consecutively, there are some other incidents in the war. It has been pretty much later, the Berlin Wall broken down, and it's even later in 1990, something like that. Not so our 1988 movement was pretty early, and since we were so much isolated, it was pretty much undercover, But at that time, the whole country were in pretty much very positive mood towards the new society until and unless we found out the military coup was very quickly came in, and then that military also make us false hope. The 1990 election was totally brilliant by its very cruelly cunning plans, I might say.
Right. So we're jumping ahead a couple years, and you describe the sense of hope and optimism in those early days and your involvement in that movement going to, and we all know how the history turned out, that was a sense of false hope, and that was taken away. And ultimately, your own path led in being involved in greater activism and trying to work towards NLD representation, and ultimately led to prison. So can you share how your trajectory took you to arrest?
Indeed, I think the military intelligence have information about a medical doctor is involved, a female medical doctor is involved, and a female writer is involved. But they thought it was two persons. They never think it was just one person, and that's me. So I was pretty much involved in underground movement after the coup in 1988 September, And after they have arrested Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest, I was pretty safe, but I couldn't stop my activity. I try to keep in touch with all the underground movement people, especially the students and some other ethnic group members, leaders from NLD. So we were against the National Convention. After 1990 election, even though NLD won majority of the seats in 1990 election, the military government didn't call for the parliaments. Instead, they just invented the National Convention to draw the draft of the constitution. And in that National Convention, only 1/7 of the participants for these national conventions are elected members. Other 6 of 7 population of the national conventions are all military-related people. So we were against it. It is pretty much like the detour from the destination. We were hoping that after the election, the newly elected government can run the country, but it was not. So we were very angry with this kind of detour, and we were against the National Convention. It's totally undemocratic, and it's very unacceptable. And you see, this National Convention started in 1993. It's finished only after 14 years. In 2007, it's finished. That's why after 2007, they tried to make a referendum in 2008 to establish this pretty much undemocratic constitution. Then we call the 2008 constitution. So in 1993, we were against this National Convention. That's why we were the target. And I was pretty much involved in lobbying and other activities against the National Convention. So I think because of this, but the undercover story is I read the publication established by National Coalition Government Abroad. It's like the parallel government, and the elected members of the 1990 election, they left for the foreign countries, they left for border and to make this coalition government. And then they distributed this New Era Journal, and I read it and I passed it on to one of my friends. But it's not as the distribution, but I think they make me putting in jail, sentenced for 20 years imprisonment for this. Instead, I think their concern is my role in making the other members, other ethnic leaders to against the National Convention.
Right. So that's a series of events that ultimately lands you in the notorious insane prison where you became a political prisoner. Can you describe your reaction on getting settled, your first moment there, your first day and week, and getting accustomed to such a new life and culture that was ahead of you?
Well, it was really very, very hard, since as soon as I was arrested, and I need to go through the investigation period. But in my case, it was a little bit different. They on the day they came to my house, and at that time, my mom and myself, we planned to go to one of the towns in Upper Burma. That town is now part of the new capital, Naypyidaw. So we set to travel to that city for having some kind of the religious activities that my mother wanted to do. And she asked the military intelligence to send me back just before we went for the trip, something like that. And I was trying to cheat them, to be frank, with some information I can give them. And I said, I need to go back home. So they sent me back home before the trip, and we went out for that trip, only 24 hours trip, took the train, go there and make the activities, and took another train to get back home. But since then, I noticed I might be arrested again. Then after 3-4 days, I was arrested, and I need to spend during at the investigation camp, and that was also really interesting experience, because at that time they even told me that, are you torturing us? Because I asked them to keep asking me, something like that. So that was pretty much like competing our kind of wisdom each other. So after that, it was not a fun, but it was really a good experience, how to respond to them and how to overcome, and reminding myself, I need to overcome the obstacle. I don't need to overcome their problems at the problems they made to me. I just try to overcome my own strength, my own response in my strength, something like that. So, but the prison environment was really, really amazing. It was my very first experience in prison, and most of the criminals also. I couldn't bear the way that their language, their manner, and amazingly, all the prison guards, even the women prison guards, the way they behave, the way they speak, the way they think, it's all very, very far from my understanding. The language is totally different, even though they speak the same Burmese language, but the communicating language by them is very hard. So for the first week, first months, it was really hard for me. It was like I was in another universe.
Right. And you go in and describe that in the book. And in addition, you talk about the difference of the types of people that are being housed there. There's the criminals and you reference the criminals might be in there for petty theft, for violence, for prostitution. And then there's the political prisoners, like such yourself. And these are the part of the prison that you're in, the women's part of the prison, is housing these two together. So what can you share about what it was like having these two different groups together and how you got along with the different political prisoners, the friends you made, or the alliances, or the difficulties, and then what it was like interacting with the more criminal element that was in there as well?
Well, I was first kept in kind of the solitary cell, but inside a very big hall, and that hall kept a lot of criminals. And I feel some empathy. First of all, I was shocked. I really cannot bear their language, their behavior. But after some times, I started learning and understanding, why they behave like this, why they did do like this. And some people, as soon as they noticed I was a political prisoner, they were very, very helpful and very kind of they really want to show their empathy and sympathy towards me. So it was really good. Some of the criminals, they are not pure criminals. Some were accused wrongly. So that kind of people were helping me to make me contact with my parents. And then I was sent to another cells after I was sentenced. At that time, the compound, it's kind of the altogether 6 confinement cells inside, and then some are political prisoners, some are treated like criminals. They were sentenced to death because of their activities during the 1988 movement. So some people, some women, they are pretty much very strange to me, but I happen to meet a girl. She's only 3 years elder than me, and she was accused of beheading the one who tried to poison the children's hospital. She's an uneducated girl, and she's really a very beautiful one. So I was shocked to learn, and indeed, it was pretty much complicated, and I think she's already being pretty much regret about her involvement in the incidents, even though it's thought to be not her own fault, something like that. So I was pretty easy to make friends with her too, because in the past a lot of the political prisoners also having a pride saying that, oh, we are political prisoners, you are criminals, something like that. But for me, I try to respect anyone, because I think even though they might committed a crime, but they since they are the human being, they deserve being respect as a human being, something like that. And I frankly say, until and unless you already regret about your activities in the past, you still have hope to recover or overcome it, something like that. So then we make pretty much close friends, and that making me very easy to go throughout my prison days. She was very helpful.
Right. And with that prisoner that you became friends with, you not only were able to have conversations, but also share materials. And in the early years of your prison, you were able to have access to a rather unpredictable supply of books, which you had to hide and you called tonics. Can you describe what the feeling was of when you would have a new book come into your life, when you have access to new reading material in that prison environment? What did those books represent to you at that time?
Well, before I was arrested, I was a bookworm, and I thought I couldn't survive without any book. And it was happened. And then she was very helpful to smuggle in some books. And, when I see these books, it was totally a tonic to me, oh, here, yeah, that's what I was looking for, because, the book was my life, I really, that was really nice to have a book in my own hand, even though I need to be very careful of keeping that for that particular night, because it was very dangerous. And a lot of the female guards are calling me as kind of the very problematic prisoners, something like that, So they were asked not to talk to me. They were asked not to help to me. I became a bad prisoner, So I couldn't have any chance to convince any female guards to smuggle in these books. So I need to totally rely on that girl next to me, the next cells to me. So we need some arrangement. So when the doc came, and she sent me the books through the setting we made before the doc, and then I read the book the whole night, and then I put it back into the bag, back to her just before the dawn, something like that. So the whole night I couldn't even slept on the wooden plate that was given for us to sleep. I need to get into a corner, using a blanket to cover myself, and I try to read, with this very dim light. The electricity inside the prison cell was not very good. I also need to cover myself with the blanket. So I voraciously, it was like the very hunger to read it all. So the whole night I just sitting in the squatting position and reading all, and it makes me so much strength. For me, my hunger is not just for the food to survive, but also for intellectual understanding. Without that, I don't think I can survive. That's why the books are really tonic to me.
Right. And do you remember which books you read and what impact some of those books had on you and the context in which you were housed in reading them?
Well, some books are religious book and Buddhism and the about the meditation, and some books are current affairs journals. We not very having kind of the novels because it's also depending on the God's chosen, So it was mainly the current affairs journals. I just want to keep in touch with the outside world, what's going on in my country, what's going on in the whole world is really matters to me. So yeah, I couldn't remember the details of these books, but it's mainly about the magazines and the literature magazines and current affair magazines.
Yeah, I can imagine how hard it must have been to get some of those in. I mean, I remember my first visit to Myanmar was 2003 and then 2007. And even at that time, in which you're talking a decade later than when you were there, and I was walking around the streets of Yangon and Freedom, I remember seeing Time and Newsweek magazines of 10, 15 years ago that were being for sale because the country was just simply so closed that even getting access to an American periodical was very difficult to do just on the street outside in bookshops or whatever. So I can't imagine how difficult it was to get that news in the prison. And yet, as you're trying to get news in the prison, there's also an attempt to get news of you, not only outside the prison, but to the wider world. And indeed, your case and your imprisonment ended up being known and talked about by people at very high levels. Bill Richardson, Michael Stipe, the lead singer of REM, others took on the advocacy of calling for your release. So, and in addition to that, you won several awards. You were given several honors while you were in prison, and you would learn about those in different stages. And sometime after it was given, and sometimes not know the full story of which award it was and what it meant. But what was it like for you as you were struggling so much to find news of the outside world, to then learn that people on the outside world, and not just people, but pretty famous and well-regarded people with some position in their societies, were concerned about you and were speaking out on your behalf, even though they had never met you, and some of them had probably never even been to the country?
Yes, it was really also very tonic. I feel very encouraged by this kind of thing when I learned. Throughout these days, what I was thinking is, okay, my presence in prisons cannot be just nothing, It means something. And then this kind of responses and this kind of concerns from these very famous people and institutions, it's already showed that, our days in prisons means not nothing, is something, So this is the very strong proof as the injustice done by the military. So I as soon as I noticed some of the happening, my birthday celebration at the War Women's Convention, etc., it was very astonishing, and I was feeling pretty much encouraged by this unexpected kind of the contribution from these groups and the people. It's really very tonic to me, to be frank. Yeah, I was so shocked, whatever I learned about this kind of things done by the either Amnesty International or PEN International. It is really amazingly encouraging.
That's great. Going back to the books that you read, the tonics that you had, you described some of them were of a nature of current events and affairs and periodicals. Others were religious texts that were talking about Buddhism and perhaps Abhidhamma, meditation, discourses by some of the great Sayadaws. And indeed, a large part of your book is talking about your practice of meditation in the prison and your transformation, not just as a prisoner and an activist, but as an individual that started to make a greater spiritual commitment to your path and your practice and your life. And that created quite a transformative effect on you in a place that was pretty difficult and was not an easy place to survive and to keep mental health. So let's get into a bit about your meditation practice and the role that played. Before looking at what meditation you did in prison and the effects it had on you, can you describe before coming into prison, what was your background with Buddhism? How were you brought up? What was your experience with meditation and learning about the teachings before getting into the prison?
Well, yes, especially my mother, she's very devoted Buddhist, and we were pretty much trained by the Buddhist tradition. And in our childhood days, at some other public Buddhist location, we can be taught some of the sutra, like Mingala Sutra, Metta Sutra, something like that. And then, first of all, I started reading a lot about the Buddhisms, and that was my very first exposure to any literature. The very first text is all about Buddhism. So I really like reading all these Buddha's teaching in my early teenage years. And then I went to a meditation retreat. Then I learned how to do the meditation, but I couldn't get enough time and chance to practice it, even though I happy reading all these things. So in prison, when I have no chance to read any books officially, I got only 3 books officially after meeting with Bill Richardson, and I got that chance to read 3 religious books, what I wanted. And all 3 books, it's including the practice, how to practice the meditation according to the Mahasi Sutra. So it's very helpful for me to practice by myself. I was not in the meditation center nor the retreat, but after reading these and having all my old experiences at the retreat and the childhood teaching, and I can handle that very well into changing my prison cells into meditation retreat.
Right. And on that topic of changing your meditation cell into a retreat, you describe the beginning of this transformation that takes place in your lifestyle as a prisoner in the book.
First, I notified everyone and explained that I had no idea how long it was going to last. Nonetheless, I promised everyone that I will be involved whenever we face problems, and that by meditating, I did not intend to cause trouble for anyone. I could not be choosy about where and how I meditated. I had to turn myself into a retreat. Perhaps there are places unfit for humans to dwell, but there is no place unfit for practicing Dhamma and meditation. Besides, there is a saying, where there have been good deeds done throughout past lives, that place can always be suited to overcoming all obstacles in the path of freedom from samsara. One communist prisoner sneered, "Well, so insane prison is to be turned into a retreat." Some warned me to be careful, as they had heard that some people went crazy after meditating. Actually, the ones who warned me about this believed that no political activist should be religious because it could weaken activists to the point that they could give up the fight.
Right. And that's a very full passage because it gets at a number of things altogether. It talks firstly about your actual practical process of setting up your cell. It then goes into your mind state and realizing that there's no place. There's no conditions, or one cannot practice Dhamma and try to come out of samsara, no matter what condition one finds oneself in. And then you get a bit into the prisoner's reaction of thinking that you're up to something, or you're not being serious, or perhaps thinking you are serious and being concerned that it's going to dilute your activism and that you can choose only one path or the other. And so I think this is interesting to look into what led you to this day to decide to make this transformation. Up to this point, you were reading books wherever you could, and once you start meditating, the reading starts to slip off a bit because you become so engrossed in your meditation. You're more involved in the politics of whatever you can learn outside, as well as the prison system. And then when you take up meditation, it's a very inward turning event in your life to really radically orient the direction of your efforts and your attention. So what led to those decisions of deciding to want to take that real radical step towards transformation?
Well, what I believe is freedom is by choice, not by chance, So I always, the almost all the time I was thinking, okay, as a prisoner, what can I do? I cannot myself releasing from prison. I cannot make any other good kind of the activities or the movement, to save the others too, So a lot of people are just saying that religious things is more like the very individual freedom. You focus on individual freedom and you just don't care about the others. But for me, I think if we are not free, how can we make others free? So the freedom for me is pretty much very meaningful than the physical freedom, something like that. So I was just thinking, okay, in the prison, what can I do? I normally, speak out on behalf of the others, and I was barred by the prison guards, You cannot speak out for the others. You can just talk for yourself, something like that. But I keep doing. That's why I became a bad prisoner. So I cannot stop this kind of thing, of course. But at the same time, I feel I need to free myself too. I try to think, okay, in the prison, what can I do? What can I do? Keep asking myself. And I think, okay, freedom is granted according to the Buddha's teaching. Freedom is granted only when you make an effort, something like that, This is the meditation. Freedom from samsara is far more harder than freedom from prison, because I can be released after 20 years imprisonment, but I cannot be released from samsara if I do nothing, And in order to be free from samsara, what should I need? It's just meditation. Just looking myself, body and mind. In prison, I don't need any more. I already have my body and mind. But for releasing from prison, physically, it might need, cooperation with the guards, or making an apology to the military or something like that. So that should be very pleasant way to make myself free by something like that. So I couldn't do that, because I took part in the activities, even though I know I very well notice I might be in prison one day, but I did it, So for me, I cannot apologize. I cannot keep resisting the military. That's one thing. But on the other hand, making myself free from samsara is very practical to me, because I have my body, I have my mind, and I can do the meditation almost all day because I have no other commitment to do in the prison. So take advantage. That's my point. And I also really having a big fear of the samsara, the cycle of lives, As far as I understand, the cycle of lives cannot be terminated by any meaningful meditation. So I think here is my chance. Take it. That's why I did it. And then that transformed me.
Right. So you're hitting at the difference between the conditional and the unconditional, and where freedom lies between that. The unconditional release or liberation from cause and effect through meditation, and the conditional dependent of origination through the in the worldly sense, having to rely on relations and connections that are beyond your control. And this is compounded by the fact that you're living in a corrupt system. And so it's very difficult to navigate a corrupt system in any kind of ethical ways as one does. And we should also, for listeners who don't have a background in meditation, we should inform that the word you're using, samsara, you're talking about freedom from samsara, that samsara indicates the endless round of rebirths that one is caught in. And so escape from samsara and liberation from that is, of course, the nibbana, the ultimate liberation. And so when you're talking about being trapped in samsara, wanting to escape from it, you're speaking about the endless cycles of rebirth. I want to take a moment to look at the type of meditation that you were doing. From reading your book, I understand a couple of influences that I've gleaned of monks and traditions. You reference Myay Yeitha Sayadaw, who is in the Mahasi lineage, and relying somewhat on his guidance. I know that I've met him before and been to his monastery, and actually was in Macau and with the Burmese community when he happened to give a Dhamma talk there. So I was fortunate enough to meet him there as well. And I know that he teaches the Mahasi form of Vipassana as well as his own metta practice as well. In addition, you also reference Mogok Sayadaw, who is, of course, has the Patisamuppada and is combines the Mogok tradition combines quite a bit of critical thought and critical understanding with the practice, with the understanding that the meditator shouldn't just delve directly into the practice of investigating the mind, but should also have a solid understanding of theory and cause and effect, especially before going into the practice. So these different traditions, maybe there are more as well that I'm not aware of, but these 2 or 3 different traditions, depending on how you count, Mahasi, Myay, Yeitha, and Mogok. Can you describe a little of where your influences were coming from, what you were practicing maybe at different times, if your practice started to change, and what type of method or instructions you were following during this time?
Well, as you said, I appreciate both the Mahasi and the Mogok, but I think you might also notice about the book I read is by this Dipaka Uchi. It's all about the translation of the Tripattana Thot, Tripattana Sutra. It's very detailed about the method of the meditation. It's more, I might say, I focus mainly on the Cittanupassana. It's all about the focusing more on the what's happening in my mind rather than the other. So I think the good things about the Mogok is, as you said, the solid knowledge is very, very helpful, not to making wrong way, but that knowledge cannot make any wisdom until and unless we practice it. So that's the basic thing. I think meditation, practice of the meditation is, it can transform our knowledge into wisdom. So that's why I think the practice of the way the Mahasi is doing is more on the part of the how to put your mindfulness on both the body and the mind. So it's not two ways for me, It's only one way. It's the Buddha's way. And according to the Mahasi Sutra, it's all about, the basic starting point is all about understanding of what is body, what is mind, and how it relates. Because our ultimate aim is to understand the anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and the anatta, no soul or non-self. So there will be more than 2-3 ways to reach them, but as long as you understand the point we are the critical point we have been gone through to reach out to the ultimate wisdom is this very basic 3 things, and these all methods are cooperating. I think that's why I might say practicing meditation in prison by myself with the help of this knowledge is really perfect for me, because if I were outside, I might go to one meditation center. I need to practice according to their doctrine. It might not work for me. So I think it's another. I think the knowledge make me more freedom to practice the real essence. So I use not just one knowledge from one doctrine, but also from the different doctrines that make me more freely to make myself accommodating with the real essence.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that also hits upon something of the difference between the way that we see the traditions alive in Myanmar and the way they then become exported to the West, where even if you were not in prison, even if you were outside in society, I think that it's not uncommon for many people, many Burmese meditators, to take what they like from one tradition, then another one, and incorporate that into their practice. And I think when those traditions start to be exported, the kind of fuzzy divided line that separates them and the way that they're all coexisting ends up taking on a more structured and formal lineage when it's described outside the country than when it's integrated in actually in the context in daily life. And so I think that for those meditators and practitioners listening from other countries who haven't been to Myanmar, I think that it could feel somewhat jarring to think of combining different kinds of techniques or teachings or traditions and that are coming from different lineages in one practice. But I think what you hit upon is not untrue and uncharacteristic of overall Myanmar society, of being able to integrate them in a wise and skillful way, understanding that they're all coming from the same source. And yet, as you're doing that, you're on your own for a large part. People around you don't necessarily understand what you're doing. You have very limited access to the kinds of books and resources that you're able to access and able to refer to. There's no meditation teacher or guide that is easily accessible for being able to get answers and ask questions. I did read in your book that you were, I think, secretly getting questions to Yeitha Sayadaw in written form. And so there was some kind of delayed guidance that happened. But what was it like for you trying to create and model your own meditation experience, being both teacher and student, and not having easy access to a guide you can go to get instruction or ask, am I doing this right? Or I'm having this problem. How do I work with this? How did you manage that sense of isolation?
Well, I think the very first thing for me, why I did it meditation, is not just taking advantage of being in prison, but also having a big fear about the samsara, the endless circle of the rebirth, because I see this kind of samsara is far more fearful than the the imprisonment, for me, after having this kind of the very entrenched fear about the circle of lives, I think this make me very powerful mindfulness, that is very, at that time when I practice, I practice up to 20 hours per day, and I just kick out anything, At that time, I didn't read, and I didn't, communicate properly with anyone, almost all the day I just meditated, So I think at that time, I have no chance to consult with any teachers, not Chamye Sayadaw, nor anyone, So I think that's why I really believe in the practice of the Buddha's teaching, So the prior knowledge about pros and cons, I have been reading a lot about these things, and I already have an experience. But when I practice, I forget about my own experience. I just focus on mindfulness all the time. The key of the vipassana meditation is just be mindful, whatever you do. So that's why I don't rely on the duration of one positions to do the meditation. I can change my position as long as I'm very mindful about my physical and mental changes. I be mindful. I be in meditation. So my key searching is, as I said, the very basic one, 3 things: anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's all. So reaching that, I think at that time I don't care about the other teaching. I just managing myself, and I think in that sense I might say the Ma Thida is a right analysis. In my mind, I try to analyze, this is what is my experience, what is this, what is, so it is very hard to explain, but I try to explain in my book very detailed. But I think at that time, reviewing myself, I think this is all about the real essence of the meditation is reviewing it in everything. Indeed, it's hard to say myself because there is no self, So I try to look out for the nature of the mind, the nature of the body, something like that. So it's as soon as I get on the road of understanding the nature of the mind and the body, the next step is automatically go into how it's interconnected, the cause and the effect, what's the harmonious relationship between the body and the mind, something like that. So it's all if we are on the right track, when we started understanding the actual nature of the body and mind, it brings, the meditation brings the right path. That's what I experience.
Right. That's a great characteristic and understanding of some of the insights that your meditation practice began to illuminate for you. I think in looking at undertaking meditation, a large part of the Buddha's teachings is the understanding of dukkha, which has been translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness of life. And I think for many of us that are caught up in the actual living of life, sometimes we lose sight of some of the deeper inherent dukkhas as we're trying to constantly get ahead and focus on the things we want and ignore the things that we don't want that are coming to us, and we lose the pattern or the insights of this ever-present dukkha that is a feature of life, of inherent in human life, according to the Buddhist teachings. This is one of the reasons why intensive silent meditation retreats given around the world, which is a relatively new phenomenon, but it's an innovative way to be able to take the practitioner in an isolated space and cut off everything else around him or her to be able to focus on some of those things deeper inside that often we don't. And so my question to you is, as you're in prison, which I'm sure is a place in which practitioners and non-practitioners, Buddhists and non-Buddhists, are inherently aware of the truth of suffering. I think that there's probably there's few places in the world where the truth of suffering is not as apparent as it is as in prison. And so I'm wondering if, looking at that particular part of the Buddhist teachings, the understanding of suffering, the role of suffering, the existence of dukkha, the Four Noble Truths, being in the prison and trying to understand and contemplate this, did you feel that it particularly led to certain kinds of insights or understandings that were different from how might one look at it outside of a prison environment?
Well, indeed, the real meaning of dukkha, the suffering, according to the Buddha's teaching, is not the physical suffering, nor having nothing what we want to, something like that. So that's why until and unless we don't understand the anicca, the impermanence, the understanding of dukkha from the layman perspective is not very complete, to be frank, according to my experience. That's why when I talk, the basic understanding should be anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's why we say suffering is, since it is impermanence, we might face a very good experience. It's also suffering because it won't last long. When we face bad experience, it's also suffering. It's suffer itself, but of course it is not permanent, but still that another different experience might not last long. So until and unless we cannot get out of impermanence, everything is suffering. That's why I said after the meditation, it's a bit easier for me to make indifference between the good and bad things. I need to say, of course, I still recognize good and I still recognize bad things, but this very experience making me a bit easier to be indifferent between the good and bad things, because I know all is impermanence, and because of this impermanence nature, whatever we face is suffering.
Right. Those are some really wise words to contemplate and live by, although it was a hard struggle on your part to gain that wisdom. In looking at your role in prison, your experiences there, moving a bit outside of meditation and looking at some of the values that meditation encourages or guides us, I want to call attention to some of the integrity, I guess we can say, that you show as a prisoner. There's many examples of you taking strong ethical stands on certain issues, many times at the expense to your own being. Just some of the things that come to mind are not taking advantages, or if there's a person with connections or some way to get things done, often purposely not wanting to rely on that route because it's not there's some corruption there, as well as not giving bribes, which of course is corruption. There's many cases in your book of being interrogated and the leading questions of what they want you to say and not responding in the way that they expect or they want, and sometimes at detriment to yourself and your time in prison, you also have a real sense of fairness. There's moments where your family has sent you some medicine or food of some kind, and you learn that some portion of what was being given to you was, or what they wanted to give was not included in the shipment. And so you refuse the entire thing. And as you joke in the interview, you're a bad prisoner in that sense, because you make difficulties for everyone by not having the system just function and work. You stop the gears of everything shifting forward, because you say, hey, this is wrong. I'm not going to accept these mangoes. I'm not going to accept this medicine because there's something taken out. And that's by principle, that won't work. As well as in some cases, not even accepting medical treatment that you very much need, because others that also need medical treatment are getting it. And so you are not going to accept that medical treatment yourself unless it's given also to those who need it, but whose case is not being acknowledged internationally as yours is. So all of these examples of integrity and choosing this strong ethical stand, they come at an expense of your time in prison and your comfort level and needs. What, in your mind, what led you to wanting to make these sacrifices and take these ethical stands? How was it regarded by those around you? What impact did it have overall on your prison experience?
Well, again, I think, I ever been very determined to be part of the society, even though, I learned there is no soul, none self. That's the understanding about anatta is also very much helping me a lot, not making myself as a priority or privilege. That's really, really helpful. After understanding the anatta is there, I try not to make myself as a privileged one very easily. And also at the same time, for me, the principles is ever matters, I just live by principle, I couldn't make myself kind of the persons who based on the other kind of favorism or something like that. It's very hard, because I just want to be very principled. I want to think the whole universe as same, because for me, since there is no soul, none self, the other beings are exactly equally respectful and valued, So that's also helping me to keep my principle almost always, even though I might sacrifice something, because I feel if we are not following our own principle, that's also related to our destiny, the destiny in terms of the politics, So the democratic society, all human beings and their human rights should be respected. So I just try to follow my principle, and that's make me more, I might say, more confident. So it's I don't know how to explain. I just want to keep my principle and keep my authority. I used to say, I ever use my own authority to face the authority, the J authority, because I feel we are the one who can make the decision, who use the authority, even though I don't accept the soul and self, because it's really hard to explain, but that's what I want to mean.
No, I think that's a great answer, and I think that even the way that when the authorities interrogate you, I think that is really illuminating in terms of how you're responding to their answers with respect, you're responding with truthfulness, and yet you're also not giving them what they want, which then becomes so frustrating for them, while also standing up for the principles of democracy, human rights, as well as showing the insights of your newborn meditation practice, which also starts to creep in to some of those interrogation settings. And there's one scene that you capture in the book. I wonder if you can share an excerpt of that moment when you're being interrogated.
Other worldly affairs, politics, human rights, and other issues, and that I would accept injustice silently could only thank me. I had never intended to forsake helping others and to remain silent on injustice, even while meditating nearly 20 hours a day. In fact, it was my love for truth and justice that caused me to meditate in order to find them within myself. I was already determined to seek and defend truth and justice because I believed there was no difference whether we were looking from religious or secular perspectives. Therefore, practicing vipassana did not mean abandoning politics, human rights, or the rights of prisoners. In the same way, defending and protecting these rights did not necessarily mean any lessening of sila, samadhi, and panya, morals, integrity, and wisdom. Most problems I saw in prisons were the result of the guards' lack of goodwill, lack of education, mismanagement, fear of repercussion, and lack of control over their own fate. Instead of solving even minor problems easily without any loss for guard or prisoner, they had the idea that they should bully prisoners. The prisoners tended to think all guards were unjust, and they focused more on what they felt rather than on solving the issue at hand. Therefore, there were only winners or losers for each incident, causing grudges and resentment. Besides, there were some prisoners who wanted to maintain their privileges and were not reluctant to distort the truth, and so more problems were created. Therefore, I continued to meditate to be liberated.
Yeah, and I think what's so powerful about that particular excerpt is the intersection that it traces between social justice and engagement in the world with the more introspective, individual, spiritual practice. And even in the West, or maybe I should say especially in the West, many practitioners haven't quite figured out how to integrate their more formal spiritual on the cushion practice with the problems that are occurring in the wider world. And so I think it's really interesting to hear in this passage the concern that others were expressing that your sense of activism and social justice and right and wrong in the world and your engagement for the betterment of all people, that this was going to be impacted by your meditation practice. And this is a very firm response to that, and declaring that your meditation practice does not make you less concerned and less engaged with what's going on in the world, but it actually informs and creates wiser and more mature decisions around it. So that's one thought I had with the excerpt you read. The second thing that comes to mind hearing this one, as well as just the overall book, is you seem to put out a kind of opinion that it's, or at least through your characterizations of people and incidences in the book, that it's not so much about bad people or individuals that you're encountering. It's portrayed more as just a very corrupt and awful system that no one in that system really has many good choices, whether they're on this side or that side or this level or that level or this background or that background, that the system itself is so corrupt and problematic that it is very difficult for anyone in any position of it to do very much. And most people don't have very good choices. And you didn't have very good choices because your choices led you to prison. And the people that are monitoring and guarding you in prison also don't have very good choices. And yet they're there protecting that corrupt system. So these are kind of two opposite sides of a coin, one being the nature of the corrupt system in which you're describing and operating in, and having sympathy for those of all stripes that are forced to live as well. And then engagement within that system to try to change it and make it better and create more positive outcomes. So what are your thoughts on this intersection of meditation and spiritual practice with engagement with the world, and also this characterization of the wider system in Myanmar and the difficulties that it creates in wherever one operates within that system?
Well, indeed, when we talk about the meditation, when I said the anesa, dukkha, anatta, this kind of very three basic knowledge, and we used to say this is Yeitha. This is not a Yeitha. Yeitha is I don't know how to translate. This is the true cognitive understanding,
Mm-hmm.
So understanding the very real things, the real truth, that can solve the problem. That's why I said most of the society itself, as you said, is pretty much, the system is also corrupted. If you don't have the right understanding, again, I might say the Mekin Shippa, or the 8 parts of the truth, if you don't have the right understanding about what is the root cause of what is happening, the way we it will be so many different ways people accommodate or respond, something like that, So it's depending on how much knowledge, how much understanding we do have, If we don't have a true understanding, if we don't have a real understanding, real knowledge, real wisdom, the way we react, the way we respond, the way we contribute to this corrupt systems will making us pretty much an injustice, or pretty much wrong path. That's why I think the meditation practice really make me easier to understand the root cause, not the result, not the effect. So that's why I think I focus more on the principle. I focus more on the root cause, not on the people. People is, for me, according to my experience and meditation practice, that there is no soul, no self. So people doesn't matter. The matter is this understanding, this the knowing of the root cause. That's, I think, for me, that's why it's very easy to understand. After I understand the anesa, dukkha, anatta from my meditation practice, I can apply in politics. So most of my approach, whenever I defend human rights or talking about justice, it's more like not on the individual level, not on the personal level, but on the system level. It's a structural level, So that's the interconnection between the meditation practice and politics, I think.
Yeah, and so then your meditation practice really changed your sense of being an activist and a political actor. After going through this transformative process, it sounds like it affected your outlook on how you wanted to take on these roles and how you carried these roles. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I do. That's why, I, as I said, I have not much personal dream in politics. That's why I'm happy with, how I just want to contribute. I just want to reflect it. I don't want to take any position, or I don't want to being recognized, something like that. It doesn't matter to me. The matter is the principle. The matter is the understanding.
Right, right. And I think it's also very interesting to hear how your responses go when you're being interrogated, and when, of course, the answers you give are going to affect when and if you're going to be released. So these are very high stakes, and yet you're answering them very honestly, but this interchange that you're undergoing at the time in prison is starting to shape your answers. And let's hear an excerpt of that happening in one exchange that you quote in the book.
Finally, he asks, "What is your opinion on the government?" He gave me a weak smile when I answer. "According to Dhamma, everything is impermanent and naisa, and I only see things as such." He then asks what I thought of Masu, Aung San Suu Kyi. "She's doing what she has to do and facing hardship, dukkha, knowingly," was my answer. As usual, I was asked, "What is your political goal?" He looked at me perplexedly when I said, "I like to do what a good citizen should do for her country, and I wish to have the right to do so. I have no other goal apart from that." This time, I did not answer as before about what I wanted to be, but what I wanted to do. My answer has changed. After a while, he left after saying, "It's no use discussing anything with you." And I said to myself that my time in prison was not going to end anytime soon. It was not even our day to fuss, but I had no regrets because I had not said anything with an eye towards shortening my sentence. The others in the block laughed when I told them of the interrogation. They said, "So you failed the test again?" Yet I passed the test I had set for myself.
That's great. That's great. And that really gives a nature of these kind of call and response interrogations you were having. And eventually you did get free, and you, after all the years that you spent in prison, you were released and you went back out into the world. So can you describe what that was like, leaving after all those years in prison and finding yourself a free person again?
Well, after understanding anicca, dukkha, anatta again, freedom, as I said, freedom is by choice. It's not by chance. So freely traveling all over the world is my choice. It's not by chance. So for me, freedom is always in my hand, So I think the experiencing new environment, new system, new society, new people, something like that, is also very, very good to me, very good experience for me. But I keep reminding myself, be careful. It is impermanence. It is suffering still. And it is the anatta, to be frank, this is the mindfulness came off and on to me, to be frank. I do meditation, not that much when I was in prison, but whenever I face, and I keep reminding me, this mindfulness came to me and keep saying, okay, you're facing good things right now, but be careful, this is impermanence. And when the bad experience came to me, and I that's why I think this is how I chose my freedom.
Right. And so much of this conversation is focusing on this intersection between the spiritual practice, in this case, Buddhist meditation, and the wider world, and especially in Myanmar, especially the current context and the recent history in the country. And I want to ask you what I want to pre-warn is a difficult question, a complicated question. I want to reference that this is actually the fourth time I've asked this question of a guest in the duration of this podcast. Those guests that I think really would have something to say about a question this complicated and difficult to untangle. The previous guests that I've had on that I've asked this to have been Shin Sarana, who is a Czech monk who's been in Myanmar about 10 years and has spoken up very forcefully on the part of the democracy movement. Sui Win, who was also a political prisoner and a meditator as well, and is the editor-in-chief of Myanmar Now, and Alan Clements, who was one of the earliest people to have an in-depth interview with Aung San Suu Kyi in the mid-90s. These three people, as you, have what you have in common is social engagement and activism with a very serious and dedicated meditation practice. The question is as follows, and I should mention these are exact words. I've gone back to the transcript from the first time, and I just want to capture the essence of the question right, because I think it's such a challenging thing to try to understand and comment on. The question is, Burma is a complicated country. It's a difficult recent history combined with a rich meditative tradition that has inspired mindfulness movements all around the world, from some of the greatest teachers and traditions that have gone into cultures around the world since. A question that I personally often get from meditators is, why is there not more peace in a country where so many people are at the forefront of pursuing inner peace? So there's this kind of contradiction. I'm wondering what your answer to this is. Why do you think there is such instability in a country where for so long, so many people have tried to attain the greatest mental inner stability?
Well, I think the real problem is with the education. The education system itself is pretty much ineffective, and including the Dhamma education, I think. The problem of the Sangha as an organization in my country, in my society, is the systems, how they learn about the teaching of Buddha is mean Dhamma, So the how they learn the teaching of Buddha is more onto memorizing, less onto understanding the real essence. And there are, as you said, there are a couple of the meditation retreats are really very good, but most of the people who went to the meditation center is like, to be frank, it's like going to the gym, So it's the aim and objectives of practicing meditation is not reaching to the point we call Pativeda. It's a end of the reaching out the real essence. So that's why most of the learning about the teaching of the Buddha is, or more or less, is like sharing their knowledge to the layman. That the most of the objectives, that the most sanghas, that their objectives is more like the sharing this knowledge of the Dhamma to the layman. And for those who practice, the Buddha's teaching is also not for aiming for the uttermost destiny, nirvana. It's more like having a good life in the current life or the consecutive life, something like that. The good things happen to them will be the ultimate aim for them. That's why they never reach out to the real essence of the Buddha's teaching. That is anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca, dukkha, anatta it's very common words, but they never make that into understanding, So that's why I said the problem of my society, my country, is we have knowledge, of course, but we cannot transform knowledge into wisdom. That's the real crisis for us. So the education system itself is never ever encouraging people even to reach out to the knowledge, for most of the laymen. For example, like another thing is, I think the problem is the language. A lot of the Buddha's teaching is richly available in Pali language, but not in Burmese or the other ethnic languages. And then another thing is there is not much translation. So people just reciting the sutra, like Metta Sutra, as in Pali, but they never ever notice the real meaning of the Pali words that should be practiced. So sending Metta is not just chanting the Metta Sutra. Sending Metta is you need to be prepared. We need to make ourselves someone who can retain the loving kindness and sharing that loving kindness to the others. So in order to do so, we need to obey. From the very beginning, inside the Metta Sutra, the words uzusa tu huzusa is you need to be honest. Very perfectly honest. Something from the very beginning is you need to prepare someone without having any honesty. You cannot be someone who can share your loving kindness, something like that. So on the basic level, the understanding of the real essence of Buddha's teaching has never been reached out to the majority of people. So that's why what I feel is the weakness in the Dhamma education, the weakness in the translation make loss, and a lot of people just appreciate the real essence of the Buddha's teaching for the current moment, even not for the current life, for the current moment. So that's the problem, the real objectives of the Buddha's teaching is for facing the samsara, the lives of the rebirths, the cycle of the life. But people just apply as they wish. With the limited knowledge, they just apply the Buddha's teaching into their layman's life just for the particular moment. So in that sense, how can this society be pretty much get out of the tradition of Buddhism?
Those are some great thoughts. Thanks for sharing that. And I've definitely heard others speak to a similar sentiment about the education system, both public as well as monastic, needing to be reformed in any number of ways. And of course, it would be an entire other podcast episode to explore the history of that Burmese education system, monastic and otherwise. Both tracks are quite compelling and interesting to understand and can shine a light on the current moment of what the country and the people are facing. And with that, let's bring our analysis up from where we've been looking of your time in prison in the 90s mainly, and look at what's happening now in 2021, 2022. I have to say, I had this weird sense when I was reading your book. I read it a couple months ago. So, of course, in the throes and the midst of what's happening with the latest Burmese military takeover. And as I was reading your book, I was also engaged, obviously, with reading the news and hearing from friends and preparing other podcast episodes and everything else that went into my day. And I would do all these other activities, and then I would go and read your book. And I would have this time warp where I'd read a few pages and I'd suddenly forget that I was reading about something in 1988. Because some of the things that you were describing, some of the terror, the inhumanity, the unfairness, the death and destruction for no reason, the senseless loss of life, and the anecdotes that you're describing, mostly before you go to prison, but during those episodes that I'm reading your book, I find I'm thinking, I have to jar myself and remember, oh, this didn't happen yesterday. This isn't the events I'm hearing about from other sources. This is something being described in 88. So it was this terrible sense of like this stuff just never ends there. It's just the same stories, the same marks, the same dynamics. It's just appearing over and over again. And it was this real pain of feeling this doom sense of repeated history that had happened in previous revolutions. However, the past is not inevitable to repeat itself. And many commentators are saying that the things that they're seeing now this year in what's been over a year of the democracy protest is going about differently than we've seen in other resistance movements to the military in Myanmar. And so for someone who had a ground seat at in 1988 with the rise of Aung San Suu Kyi, the formation of NLD, being a political prisoner yourself and an activist, a writer, a doctor, everything else that goes along with that. As you're watching and following along with this current moment, what do you see? What stands out? What's similar? What's different? What hopes or fears do you have?
Well, I think the current situation, when I see from the people's side, it has transformed a bit, compared to the 1988. With total isolation, we have not much knowledge about human rights. We just want to be free from the oppression of the socialist government. We just want to get out of the poverty, etc. So our dream was not very, very big. But after getting out of isolation, being exposed to the war through the digital platform, through the lack of the censorship, something like that, the current generations have more ambitious dream and determination, and more they weaponize themselves with more knowledge about the other practical things like technology, and I think they have less wound compared to us, because they didn't. Most of the teenagers right now, they never ever experienced these kind of atrocities. They just heard of, They even might say, "Oh, we were neutral," because we never knew this military was this much atrocity. Something like that. So the way they see the present and the future is more neutral, more positive, and more dedicated to equality, no hatred, kind of the sort of the tragic or the tragedy nor the sorrow, something like that, more a neutral way. But relatively comparing to the army, the way they make these atrocities is the same as in 1988. The pattern was the same, the way they killed the same, the way they treated people the same, the way they think, how the people responded to them, they were the same. So it's, I might say, the army itself has never developed nor grown enough since 1988. Before 1988, So the consecutive leadership of the Tamador, the military, show their failure of making their own institution developed into a well-accommodated institution with the needs of the time, So I think this is also making us more tragic, For them, I still cannot believe that if someone's leading one institution, this leader's dedication towards its own institution should be big enough, should be pretty much positive enough. But what I have seen is the institution is totally destroyed, even though the people, the people oppressed so much throughout this history. But, the people, the society itself is pretty much, civilians are pretty much accommodated to the needs of the time. It has been developed so much, it has been transformed so much. Even though we have been no chance. It's pretty much with the very limited resources, nor the chance. But the society already show we are able to understand what is justice, what is human rights, what is the democracy, what is federalism, etc. We weapon ourselves with the necessary knowledge, necessary attitude, necessary behavior. But the Tamador, the military, didn't do anything else. They just wasting the state's budget, state's human resources, and everything. And they still try to use the religion and race as the weapon. How much they are wasting just by themselves, their lives, their institution is almost lost in this fight. Even though a lot of people might be killed and a lot of people might lost their properties, their everything. But I think the loss of the Tamador as an institution is the biggest ever. So they should make sense back. How to behave, and then we can solve the problem. Otherwise, until and unless they don't make sense, the problem will keep going on.
And as we look at how institutions and people have evolved since 1988 and comparing the present moment to back to 88, I want to ask your feelings about Aung San Suu Kyi. You had a front row seat with watching Aung San Suu Kyi find her political voice, become a leader of the people, a founder of the party, and go through all the turmoil she went through of attempted assassination attempts and home arrest and all those other injustices, and then ultimately take power in the 2010s. Of course, as many people have remarked, there's a distinction between being on the side, being powerless, and something of an icon for a set of values against a very evil tormentor, and then actually being someone in a role who is having to make decisions and wield some kind of power. Obviously, there was never really full democracy or full control in governance, but there was certainly some decision making that there wasn't before. And in watching her go through that transformation and observing her in the 2010s start to become a leader who was not just an opposition or resistance force, but someone who was actually having to make hard, calculated political decisions, what is your view on what choices she made and how she has moved from being that democracy icon into someone who has been at the forefront of government?
Well, I think in this case, I might say that her responses is pretty much related to the responses from others towards her. I think the whole world has determined to support her as an icon on behalf of the whole society, whole country, That make her much more confident about her leadership. And she think whatever she decides, whatever she initiates, or whatever she demands, there will be the equal, pretty much similar supportive responses from the society within, So indeed, in reality, it was not, as I said, the society has been evolved already. The different people, different group has been gone through so many things. Even though they were supporting her for so long, But, the way they see her as an opposition and the way they see her as a leader, it's not the same. But, for her, that might be the same, the society might be the same, even though she has transformed, or her position has been changed, something like that. So I think the response of her and the response towards her has never been pretty much matched along and came along. That's another challenge we have been going through. Indeed, if we, from the very beginning, if we focus more on the decentralized collective leadership throughout the history, that might be not that much disappointment towards her, So that's one thing I have been observing. And then for her, I think she try to understand both the society and the Tamador, but she never ever understand the Tamador as we did, So she has so much hope and confidence about her ability to convince, but the group has proved that was failure, At the same time, the society has been not the same as in 1988. So she has to be very careful about reading the response of the society, of the international community. But I think she cannot read that much very well, So the problem is, I think, the way she has been dealing is more like focusing more on convincing the Tamador to change. At the same time, the way the Tamador has been seeing her is to abusing her to make their changes established, something like that, But the society has more towards way forward looking into the future and very practical, not just focusing on herself nor the Tamador, society, the whole country, it has been pretty much ready to way forward, That's why I think that this in this triangle, the society is still winning. That's what I have been witnessing.
So it sounds like you think that Aung San Suu Kyi's biggest mistake or failure as a leader was seeing a sign of optimism that the Tamador could be transformed. Is that correct? Like a naivete, you could say. Is that correct? Do you think that was really the place where she went the most wrong during her years as leader?
Yeah, that was not just simply because of this opinion, but also, the 2008 constitutions and some other things prohibited her to make such a significant change. That's also we need to confess, So yeah, you're right.
Right. And I think, and you also hit upon something, you mentioned it briefly, but I think it's worth underscoring and expanding. You describe a history in Myanmar not of systems that are able to govern and support the people and to be whatever those systems are to be effective, but rather personalities and individuals. And there's been there have been scholars and academics who have pointed to the role of Buddhism in this, and within Buddhism, the role that a leader, a king, would have towards his people, and the people would have the reciprocal relationship back towards the king, and how to this day this still creates. This is still a problem in Myanmar, that leaders end up having more power than systems or parties or processes or other things. And you pointed to this in your response as well, that this has been something of a challenge in Burmese history going back, that we haven't seen a lot of systems of any kind that have been built to be really equitable and solid and fair and everything else. It's been a lot of the success of certain societies have been predicated on a single leader and the personality and wisdom and even divine nature of that leader having the adequate paramis and karma to be able to hold that position rather than some of the institutions of civil society. And I think that's also where some people have been a little surprised or frustrated that it seems that she has behaved in some ways that seems to have followed somewhat in that mold of having a very tight inner circle. And it's been said that she's been somewhat resistant to criticism and has valued a sense of loyalty on a personal level over perhaps wider civic decisions and political decisions going forward. So I also wonder if this leader-driven form of governance that we've seen in Myanmar, to what extent she continued to embody that. And as we look at the revolution now, and assuming that the people are to win and to set up their new country, how there might be a way to break free of relying on the personality or benevolence or wisdom of a particular person, but rather setting up systems that can succeed where the feelings of individuals might not.
I think the another thing is people still misunderstand the teachings of the Buddha and the tradition. For me, the king and the relationship with the king or the personal the individual centered leadership is not related to the Buddhism. A lot of the tradition and because the real essence of the Buddha's teaching is ever not related to the persons or individual, because the anatta says there is no soul or no self. So it is for the tradition, for the layman world, there might be something appreciated the leadership, because in these days when the Buddha was on earth, there was only the kingdom, and the rule of the king always matters in that sense. That's why until and unless the individual leader are good enough, the society cannot be good, something like that. So in the real problem of our society is, it's very hard to imagine the nation, the whole country is never being pretty much having chance to discuss about what kind of society we really want to have or build, and the collective identity is never being discussed well. So that's why I think in this sense, people try to use their emotion rather than knowledge to impose the society they want to live, something like that. So it's very difficult. Still very difficult. It is the biggest challenge is until and unless people believe in the collective identity and the collective leadership. But now is pretty much promising. That's all I can see.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I have just one question before we let you go. You were a young activist in 1988, which ultimately led to years of imprisonment as a political prisoner, of which your book is mainly about. Sadly, tragically, there are so many Burmese youths today who grew up believing that this whole period you went through was a kind of closed book of history, that especially the urban Bamar youths that were growing up and did not actually know of this with any of their experience, and are now facing this head on in tragic and terrifying ways. And the Burmese prisons are now becoming filled with these young people, these these good-hearted people striving for change and sacrificing themselves for the betterment of their society. And the doors of the cells that you saw for the first time, they are now witnessing as well for the first time and trying to survive and to deal with. So much of your book is about your survival in prison, not just physical, but also your survival of ethical values, your survival of mental balance, of spirituality, and as well as your actual survival. We didn't even get into the health challenges that you had from lack of time and the fullness of your life. But that was also another very serious thing that you had to undergo. For those people listening, including those Burmese youth activists who are sacrificing so much and doing so much for their people and their country, who might one day, let's hope not, but might find themselves in prison, in those cells, and trying to survive as you did on those different levels, what advice or guidance would you give to them? What would you like to speak to them from your own experience, from your wisdom and what you've learned in having lived through that and passed through?
Well, I might say still be present, We need to be very present to face everything. And another thing is we need to understand what was the past. Without understanding the past, we cannot make a better future. That's why, at the same time, we need to be very present. And I think another thing is always focus on principle, not on person. If unless we focus on principle, we will find the solutions very easily and not making ourselves or the others desperate. Because if we focus on people to solve the problems, at least one person should be desperate, something like that. So that's why the winning secret will be focusing on the principle, focusing on the destiny, and keeping an eye the will of the majority of people, not just one person or yourself. That will help solving the problems easily. Empathy always matters, and use your own empathy to understand the society, and fulfilling the needs of the others will make sure you will have your needs too, something like that. So.
Well, thanks for those words, and thanks for the time that you took today to share some of your experiences over these years, and really appreciate again the chance to hear these words and reflections of your perspectives, and also some of the years that you passed through. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
One of the most tragic aspects of the current crisis in Myanmar is how isolated Burmese protesters feel, and in fact are. Thankfully, through our nonprofit organization Better Burma, we're able to ensure that all your donations successfully reach their intended target on the ground. So if you found yourself moved by today's discussion and want to do what you can to help, please consider giving to our donation fund, which is 100% directed towards supporting the democracy movement. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go to support a wide range of humanitarian missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person, IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and much more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution for a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian aid work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org. That's BETTERBURMA.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either the Insight Myanmar or Better Burma websites for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.